And then we got into YCombinator, and while everyone was so excited, initially we were day one of YCombinator, then Apple launched ARKit. So
Wow.
which when all of your demos, which we had a lot of mobile AR demos, they look like Tim Cook's demos on stage. Anyone who says that they've been like afraid of like, oh, competition, everything else, like when you just see like, hey, Tim Cook's betting the whole company on this, and they're just like, his demos look better than ours. Crap.
All right. Hello, Builder Journey listeners. It's Don here. We're doing another Metaverse Monday edition with Lori, of course, and our very special guest, Ross. Ross, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Oh, pleasure to meet you all.
Awesome. So Ross, you are one of the most accomplished founders within the AR space. Escher Reality was a company that you were running back when we met, probably guess in 2016. You had raised from YC. You had raised from Founder Fund, and you ended up selling it to Niantic, which is the creator of Pokemon Go, and then you worked there for a while. So really, you've seen this industry from like the insider's perspective of the top VCs and what they're looking for. And so I think a lot of our listeners are aspiring to become you or to become something similar to what you've accomplished. And so we'd really like to basically dive into how you see AR, where you think the opportunities are, as well as what are the founder lessons you've learned. Now, we were doing a quick intro chat before this, and you mentioned that AR in the hype cycle is not coveted at the moment, which surprised me in the sense that it doesn't surprise me because it's true, but it surprises me in the sense that Apple just announced a AR first headset. So can you maybe talk through the whole landscape, how you're seeing it, and why there isn't hype currently?
If you want to talk through the whole landscape, we're going to need more than this call. So, well, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here and happy to help other aspiring founders on there. Yeah, and in the hype cycle right now, like you have to do for old timers like Don and I who've been here for a while, like you see here's the Magic Leap hype cycle. Then you have Apple launching ARKit, that hype cycle. And then you can see the Meta renaming that hype cycle. So then it's kind of right now, everything's focused on the AI front. So from there, just no, it comes and goes. And if you're a founder in the space, like, don't worry about it too much. Like, hey, just wait a couple years. That's historically what it's been for the last decade. So with that said, like what I'm seeing in the market right now, there's kind of been three main trajectories that people have been developing different hardware solutions for. There's kind of virtual reality and mixed reality, which Apple's kind of group in there. There's not consensus in terms of what the terminology is, but you can say from a tech perspective, there's video pass through of like camera looks at the world, goes to screen goes to lens to the eye, versus what was more HoloLens, Magic Leap kind of see-through displays where it's the photons from like the chair in your room coming directly to your eye, plus the additional kind of waveguides or other optics that can be put in there. So historically, there's been like virtual reality, mixed reality, there's been smart glasses, and there's been immersive augmented reality. And kind of the difference in between them all is one is you don't really see the whole world, you have amazing field of view, amazing colors, but you have kind of a brick on your face just because having a large system in front of there. So that's what you see with the Oculus Quest with cameras on there. You see with the Apple Vision Pro, which has amazing cameras, amazing displays. Then in the smart glasses, you're thinking of like the Google Glass, and there's a whole variety of different technologies that have been out there, but that's more of a simple heads-up display. How do you have like smartwatch style processor just up on your face and a tiny display giving you notification information, maybe running information. There's different varieties of that. Then you go to the other side of the spectrum of immersive augmented reality, and in there that's like the HoloLenses, the Magic Leaps. That's like, hey, you can see a Pikachu, you can walk with them down the street, and it's kind of like everything you'd expect from the kind of futuristic version of augmented reality. So what I see right now is mixed reality and virtual reality, like kind of this, hey, you sit at your desk, you're in an in-home environment. Usually it's by yourself, even though Meta's trying to push like, hey, this is a way to connect with more people digitally. So that's like more on the upswing right now, primarily because of the Apple Vision Pro and also the amount of sales from the Quest 2. And there's a lot of other devices coming through there. And there's some nice applications, like I've always loved for many years, computer monitors as a use case. So like, hey, if I can have a portable 100-inch computer monitor, that costs $3,500. Like, well, I might have like 3 different computer screens around me that might cost $3,500 as well. So I think there's a value proposition in there. For smart glasses, I think that's good. And that's probably the only way from a very feature limited standpoint to get into a consumer form factor if you want to have kind of fundamental glasses. And immersive AR with HoloLens kind of downsizing, Magic Leap continuing to struggle in there. There's been kind of a lot less excitement, a lot less movement in immersive AR, even though the major tech companies are still keeping that well funded in R&D. But I would say that's a little bit farther out from getting the type of sales numbers that you're looking at the Quest and other devices.
And where do you see some of the early use cases for Apple's Vision Pro coming from?
I think a lot of it is going to be the prosumer. I mean, it's a pro device, but like, again, I love the computer monitor use case. It's very clear there's an existing market. And that's actually one of the most important things in the AR VR space is like, not a new computing medium, it's changing something that exists there. So if people spend money today on computer monitors, and that's the way to do it. There's different applications in training, which like the Quest has been used in B2B use cases. Gaming's obviously another one. But I think for like the Apple specifically, my best guess would be if you have well, we'll see as the numbers come out and might be eating my words in the future, but I could see a bunch of consultants wearing those on planes so they can have a private 100-inch screen monitor, get a lot of work done while they're on a plane as they're kind of going from like Asia over to America and back again. I can see developers in a work from home environment having a computer monitor at their desk if they're alone. I don't see like people having dinner together and sharing an experience that way, or even watching TV on the couch. Like, people aren't going to buy like 4 or 5 of these devices. Probably one for more prosumer experiences on there. And like maybe you'll see a couple in coffee shops, but like the fact that you're tethered still, like you have a cable, you have a 2-hour battery life, and maybe you can swap out more batteries on there. I don't see this as like a mobile device that you're going to like. I will be shocked if anyone's walking down the street with it.
Yeah, of course not. But I think it's so interesting because back in the day, we used to talk about VR is going to change or replace the computer. And in the most unimaginative way possible, that's what you're talking about. It's like we're just literally virtualizing the computer screen, nothing more, nothing less. And I agree, that's a killer use case.
Yeah, well, it's recurring. A 100-inch monitor would be very huge, but we're always like, do we get a laptop that's like easy and portable, or do we get like one of the bigger screen that we can do more work on? Like that solves an issue one. So I just can see that being something that people come back to again and again and again with a clear differentiator on there. Now, with that said, they still have some problems like vergence accommodation conflict, like your focal distance and the angle of your eyes. That is not going to be consistent as you kind of look at a computer monitor like kind of 50 centimeters away from your face and you look at the rest of the world. And also in true Apple fashion, they made it out of metal and glass, like that's not light, and the cable is going to be a little bit annoying. So that's kind of all I view the use cases there. Theoretically, it's a question of the eye comfort and the physical ergonomical comfort, but that's one thing that we just need to see. Are there enough people that are okay with that? Does that work in environments? And that I view will be the make or break, at least for the computer monitor use case. For training applications, which have been around for a while, like I can see that, but again, you're not going to get the number of sales that a company like Apple would really care about, I don't think. But granted, from everything I heard from their display supply chains, like they can't make many of them because it's such a high quality display that actually manufacturing is difficult. But now we're going down a hardware rabbit hole, which is where many AR companies spend way too much time in.
Well, it's fascinating because it's so different from where things were 6 years ago when you were still, you had an Oculus Go that wasn't even 6 degrees of freedom back then. So it's tough to realize how much progress has actually been made, but there really has been. Taking maybe like keeping that in mind and knowing there's a different ecosystem for founders that are starting companies today and within the last year, like a totally different ecosystem. However, there are a lot of, I'm assuming, the same lessons when it comes to company building. Can you rewind us to the incorporation of Escher and just talk through like the first few months of how you got into the YC batch and then where you went from there?
Oh, we can go. Escher was founded about a year before, a little over a year before we went to YCombinator. So that was kind of we were still part-time, my co-founder and she was working in industry, I was still in academia. We're like, hey, AR, that's going to be cool. And this was before Pokemon Go. And we're just like, yeah, that sounds like it's the future. We saw a lot of the Magic Leap videos and we were just like two wide-eyed tech people like, oh, let's go in that direction. And then over time, we had the market beaten into us and had particularly good advisors to help us in that process. But we initially started out actually as a company called AR Spirit because we thought the first use case would be AR spirit animals. And we had an adorable idea of like, hey, you share your spirit animal with you. You kind of come back and like Tamagotchi in your own home. And then our monetization model, if I remember correctly, was to monetize cyberbullying. So then if you wanted to give like your friend's spirit animal a hug, and that would be free. But if you wanted to like zap them with a super laser or a flamethrower or something, that would cost 10 cents. So then that was like tech mindset, like, oh, if you build it, this is going to be great, which I mean, I still kind of enjoy that, but
Yeah.
and then we said, hey, we're not good gaming people. We don't
I would
actually
totally spend on that.
Yeah, like you can see some of the logic in there, even today. Like, well,
That's funny.
but then we decided, okay, we're better at the tech side, and then rather than just doing mobile augmented reality, we kept running out of memory on the device for the amount of maps that we stored on there. So then we said, okay, we're not good at the gaming, cut that, and rather than mobile AR, that it's hard to make money with an SDK. Then we're like, oh, but we keep running into this like storing map problems. And then at that time, Niantic had just launched Pokemon Go, which ironically we were like, oh, that's a gimmick. The AR isn't that great. And then it was from pure tech mindset. And then like 3 days later had like more downloads than like any other app in that time frame. So we're like, oh, dang it, eating our words. And then and then we started to get it more and more into the, okay, we're gonna monetize by like being a map database and kind of be the database of everything you see. And then we applied in the spring and got into the summer batch of Y-Combinator of 2017.
So
and
at that point, were you still doing the game, or you had completely moved off that by the time?
No, we cut the game after like 6 to 9 months, and this was part-time work because we're kind of like thinking through it, but we had like regular meetings on there, and then we were like, hey, let's settle down. That we started to move full-time, and we were a full SDK at that point, but still mostly on the mobile. And then we got into Y Combinator, and while everyone was so excited initially, we were day one of Y Combinator, then Apple launched ARKit. So like
Wow.
which when all of your demos, which we had a lot of mobile AR demos, when they look like Tim Cook's demos on stage, anyone who says that they've been like afraid of like, oh, competition, everything else, like when you just see like, hey, Tim Cook's betting the whole company on this, and they're just like, his demos look better than ours. Crap. So then we went on like a co-founder and I went on a long 3-hour walk and then got sunburnt as we were like, okay, what do we do now? What does this mean? Do we understand that? Do we pivot to like ultralight backpacks? So literally a topic that we brought up on there. It was kind of in the craziness of who knows like what's going on at that point. Then came back and then understood, oh, that they actually were doing the SDK on the phone, but they weren't actually doing any of the mapping stuff on the cloud. We're like, had to figure out the right phrasing, but when we went into Y Combinator day one, everyone was like super excited, big smiles, and great to meet you all. And we were like the two dejected founders that were like, Apple just crushed us. But it ended up making our entire business because it was like, hey, they stole the free part of our freemium business model, and we just needed to kind of ramp up a lot of the cloud-based stuff. So then that ended up being hugely successful for us, and we did our fundraising in like 10 days because it's the best pitch ever. Hey, next month like 250 million devices in the world are going to be AR enabled, and we solve all the back-end problems, and came up with our pitch in there of, hey, you need to understand reality in order to augment it. We do the understanding part, and then raised from top tier VCs, which we're very fortunate with. And then Niantic approached us shortly after that, actually through some of our venture capitalists, and then they're like, they were the former Google Maps team, so they understood a lot of the mapping angle. They had 92% of the market we were selling into. And it was effectively like, hey, what you'll raise for the next 5 years will be your next year's budget. And we're like, okay, that's like, so it was very compelling. Not a direct quote, but it was kind of effective.
Yeah.
And we joined them when they were 120 people, so it was kind of still pretty small at that point. And then went through hyper growth during the kind of crazy post Pokemon Go stages, once things had settled down internally.
I invested into 60 AI, and they also sold to Niantic. They got purchased after you got acquired, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they were purchased about 2 years after.
Yeah. Okay. So you were like, wow, you're like the infrastructure of Niantic.
Yeah, we were their first augmented reality acquisition, and they had like 1 or 2 people that are on the computer vision side when we started. And then we came in, and then we joined by a couple other people, and then grew it up. And now it's, I think, well over 100 people. I don't know. With some of the market dynamics, don't know how that's changed, but it was very, very fun experience. Learned a heck of a lot. Got to see the ups and downs. Internally, hypergrowth is a great thing, and also you need to plan accordingly for it. But yeah, quite the ride.
There's a bunch of things to dive into deep there. Start with the decision to sell. So just psychologically as a human, like you came from an academic background. Did you want to do the entrepreneurial thing? Did you want to scale the company? Was the like offer just too good? What was your personal reasons for making that acquisition decision?
I mean, it's all very personal, and it depends on the founders and what their goals are. So for me, like, it wasn't my personal goal to get a quick acquisition. And initially we were like telling them, no, please just like use our service. Like, so that was kind of how the initial conversations went. But again, it's just you need to figure out what is valuable to you. Like for us, we didn't want, like at the time we were approached by many corp dev people, and then I didn't actually know at the time, coming from an academic problem, like what the hell is corporate development? Like, I wouldn't even respond to the emails, and like everyone else is like stupid. But essentially it felt like, okay, Niantic got our vision. Since they came from a mapping background, they're like, hey, like we want to build the map of the world. You guys are also building the map of the world, and they have a lot of the use cases. So it kind of seemed like a very nice fit from the outside of like, okay, they're small. It's not like you're joining a 100,000 person company. They really wanted to bet, and going inside, they did bet very big, or they continue to bet very big, like the AR map of the world, and thinking about Earth as an AR game board, and even expanding beyond just gaming. So there's a lot of synergies, and particularly we had one champion in there, Michael Jones. He was previously very high up in Google, and he was kind of the one strategic advisor for the company, who then was like very persuasive guy, and kind of made sure that it was a kind of easy transition going in there. So yeah, it was a very like, would I do it again? Absolutely.
That's as good of testimonial as you need for a decision. What is that like working in Niantic and seeing that hypergrowth first person? There's very handful of groups of people that actually get to see that from that perspective.
Like a lot of companies, hypergrowth is more venture capital, and it's even rarer to have it as just pure revenue driven.
Yep.
So then I view that those are kind of two, it's an important distinction to make in between the two of those, because one is, okay, you're growing tremendously, but the expectations are growing huge as well. And while Niantic still had like very large expectations and continues to do, but it's a little bit different if you have like VC overlords saying like, spend more, versus like, okay, let's invest and grow. So from that experience, fantastic learning experience. And like, there's both pros and cons to that. And that's not say like tremendous respect for like Niantic and how they approached it, and the fact that they kind of went through hypergrowth in Google before. They had a lot of lessons learned internally, which was great to watch from the outside. But then the day, if you, in our first 18 months there, like it was 6x at the company, I think 5 or 6x, like all the processes, like no matter how good you are at management and deciding all of it, like the processes need to adapt and change to that size. And that can take a while. And if that takes more than like 6 months, and the company has doubled in that 6 months, and the processes need to change again. So it's like as much of a blessing as it is a curse. But I mean, I think it was very like, you kind of need to take a breath at a certain point and say, okay, let's kind of make sure things can scale and keep, because if you have like, what's the saying, like if you put 9 women in a room, you're not going to get a baby in a month. So like some things do take time. If you double the amount of people on there, that doesn't necessarily double the amount of work. But with that said, if you're in a fortunate spot of like, hey, we're being very ambitious, we're going after kind of this, like when you're literally saying, hey, let's make Earth as an AR game board, like that's a very big vision and a very ambitious thing to go after. And you're going to need a lot of people. And being in that type of environment where you're just told to go, you're going to reach a lot of bumps along the way, but like it's a very fortunate experience. So like they tremendous amounts of lessons learned, fortunate for Niantic and how they approached a lot of the stuff on there. But like anyone who says that they've gone through hyper growth and it was a walk in the park, it's not.
How many direct reports did you have when you ended up or at your peak?
I'm not sure how much I can share about the internal stuff in terms of going into it, but let's just say I had at least a VP and some senior directors.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So if you're a startup in today's world looking to get acquired by someone like Niantic or another big company, how should startups be thinking about how to position themselves to go through that process?
Well, there's 2 different phases of it. One, I would say, don't position yourself to get acquired. Like if you want to get acquired, then you're probably just going to end up like, then just focus on building up the team, and then you can get like a 2 to 3x what a signing bonus would be. But then you're still locked in over time in there. But fundamentally, especially now in AR, VR for the entrepreneurs that are going after that space, like really just focusing on solving an actual pain point. Like if you don't have either revenue or a customer kind of a clear path to get there, and you just have, hey, we're working on AR and this is cool, and there's so much money flying around Meta, like the number of times that I've heard, oh, well, Meta's spending $10 billion a year going after this. And like, they have a bunch of really smart people. They know their problems. And like, if you actually have traction, you're from an acquisition standpoint worth so much more than like, hey, I'm solving a kind of cool area on there. Now there's like, maybe there's some IP that becomes very critical that like some major company wants to get before another one gets in there, and you want to have the patents on there. There's still some plays in there, but fundamentally I view like a lot of the hardware plays and the tech platform plays, a lot of those horses have already been in the runnings. So then now it's a little bit more on, okay, the applications and what are the how do you get users and traction on there? So like, I would not focus on an acquisition, but like if you build real value, then like everyone will be looking at you, because that is really rare right now. Of like, okay, what is recurring use cases? Like, I mean, when we first met like 5-6 years ago, like, oh, Beat Saber's getting traction on there. Still, Beat Saber's like gotten traction. And like, if you have a game or an application with like, hey, 1 million downloads, you're now very like, in the early days of platform wars, content is king. So then if you have like the kind of content and the user base on there, then that's going to be very valuable. If you're building up some of the tech tools on there, if you're going more B2B, and like, okay, who are the initial customers on there? What is the data that you're collecting? What is the revenue numbers? So I think fundamentally not thinking about it as an AR, VR specific company, and just how do you actually build a company with customers and users, I view as the best way to go after it. And I would say from my own, perhaps I'm not as deep into the space or as some of the other people you've had on your show, but like the investor environment of, oh, we're an AR, VR investor in a space like that is a kind of tech area, like rather than what is an application. And tech is always 2 steps away from a customer. So then if you solve the middle step in between tech and a customer, you say, okay, what is the value proposition, what you're going after? A lot of the basic kind of business fundamentals. I view the AR space needs that more. Like virtual reality, it's like now getting a bit more hype with Apple stuff. There is traction in there. Like Meta's sold a lot of devices, but I'm curious to see their monthly active user numbers, which I don't think are 0, but I'm not sure it's up to the 20 million of devices that they've sold. So then, but if you can get more traction in there and just build a good company, probably the best thing. Now for an acquisition, if you're at a point that you have traction, you're getting interest in there, just keep focusing on like, what is the value you can provide to the acquirer? Why are you better? Why is it 1 + 1 = 40? Because acquisitions are pretty risky. Like I think there's some statistics on the majority of them don't actually lead to net value. So then how can you say, hey, how is like my company plus your strategic positioning in a way that can accelerate you faster than if you're trying to build this yourself? Or how do you expand off into a new area? So like very 10 years old now, but like Oculus is a hardware company, and Meta wanted to go into a hardware direction, which is a very, very bold and strategic bet. And even though Mark Zuckerberg gets a lot of flack for that, I think it's actually strategically really brilliant. But like they need to grow in that area. So then they spent a lot of money on a hardware company, and then they bought some like control labs that did a kind of wrist-based sensors for reading it, because they wanted to get into wearables and some of the user inputs for that. They bought some kind of optics companies that kind of can help them on the micro LED side, based out of London. So then it's kind of like, do you fit a niche in there? But fundamentally, you need to actually build something. And right now, I view most of the stuff is how do you get either data, revenue, or users. And if you're not getting one of those 3, then there's many other companies that can exist in there, but I think those are the kind of 3 big ones that people will be looking at right now.
Laurie says he has a question related to what you just said there.
Yeah, just one of the common pitfalls we see a lot in the AR VR space at the moment is founders that get too focused on kind of what they're building product wise and tech wise and forget about the fundamental of startups is selling and traction. Can you just talk about how you balance that very early doors out the gate, like especially you as a technical founder? How did you kind of balance that product tech side with the sales business development?
So on there, we were lucky early on to have some fantastic advisors. There's one guy in particular, Monty, who was great with us that we met, and he was essentially like, he'd appreciate this analogy. It was like kind of dunking your head in the water. You're like, the tech doesn't matter, and pulls your head up. No, it matters, and dunks it in the water. No, it matters. Finally, like, no, the tech doesn't matter. Stop. Are you sure? And he's like, okay. So then you get into, okay, like what is the value that you can have to the end customers? And for us, for my last company, we were looking at the gaming space, and in there it was like, okay, how do you actually get numbers? Like gaming, there's a lot more like, hey, is this cool? You have a lot of really excitable people going after it, but then just actually having people force you and kind of hold you accountable for, okay, why is gaming the right market for this? Why not go after marketing? Marketing dollars could have been a lot easier. Initially, we thought that we got some initial traction in there, but then when you look at the gaming side, then it's like, okay, their customer acquisition cost in mobile is becoming more saturated. So then it actually, to acquire a new customer was like 4x than what it was 18 months before. So then therefore, they were actually starting to branch into the virtual reality space at the time, just because it offered like new true open landscape that they could actually develop in and differentiate, because like it's hard to be Angry Birds like 5 years after the iPhone came out. It's easier to be Angry Birds like 12 months after the iPhone came out. So then we kind of settled on gaming. We got a lot of interested traction. And then at the time when Apple came out, like our developer wait list was growing. Like great thing for venture capital meetings when you meet on a Tuesday and you're like, hey, we have 600 people on our wait list. And you meet again on a Thursday and you're like, hey, we have 800 people on our wait list. And they're like, wait, I thought this was 600. That was in my notes. And you're like, well, it was, but it's been 2 days. It's like, and then that gets checks closed a lot quicker. And then
it sounds like you enjoyed your fundraise process much more than most people did.
No, it sucked it was condensed pain. Let's just put it that way. So then it was like other people, it's kind of long drawn out, 3 to 6 months can go in there, but it was crazy. Yeah, YCombinator helps you with the fundraising process. If you're one of the kind of hot companies in there, you can close a lot quicker, but you do need to stand out in the YCombinator space. And we were just the only AR or even virtual reality company at the time, so we had an easier time standing out once Apple launched. But to get back to the initial question of like how to balance the tech side and the product development, it's really just forcing yourself thinking through like, okay, how many customers have I talked to at this time? Like, what is the terminology that they use? How do they kind of think through their value proposition? Understanding like, what are their spreadsheets? Like, what is the cost models as they go into there? Like in the gaming space for Escher, they were initially thinking on, hey, our costs go by the per API call. But then we found out that, okay, if you say per API call, a gaming person doesn't know what that costs, like how many API calls are there going to be. But then they modeled everything on a per monthly active user. So then we said, okay, if you just average that out, take the middle number, add on 20%, so then you make sure that you have a profit on there, then you can have hey, we charge on a per monthly active user, and we'll lose money on some power users, we'll make money on most of them, and then that fit nicely into their models, and then they could track and see how that would work out in their system. So just keeping in mind that tech is 2 steps away from a customer, and you need to solve for that middle step. And we're just fortunate to have good advisors to, as I said, like effectively like dunk our heads in the water as we went through that. But if I can say something good about that it wasn't all just like other people beating it in. I was told that from Monty's like, yeah, I tell many startup founders this, but then you're the only one who came back with new questions. Like normally I have to tell the same conversation. So being adaptable and learning, taking in some advice, but also knowing when to filter advice, because some very kind of well-known people would give us advice because they thought about our company for 5 to 10 minutes, said to us to go in a certain direction, and that was a very wrong direction given all the market dynamics. But we knew our company and our space, so then we could go different from that. But it's a constant balance of like when to listen to advice, which is why I say for founders that I mentor, I'm like, the best advice I can ever give you is to learn to filter advice. Throw away everything I say, I will be almost proud of you. And the idea there is, well, it's a little tongue-in-cheek. It's the act of knowing what to filter is actually a very hard to develop skill, and you never know if you got it perfectly right until potentially a year or 2 afterwards. But yeah, it's a fuzzy area.
Your story has a very interesting mix of luck in the timing of ARKit and how that kind of unfolded, but it also has a very clear mix of decision-making skills, which are what you're talking about. Like you were aware enough about the reality to move away from your Tamagotchi-like game into an infrastructure play. You were aware enough to tell smart VCs, we don't think that's the right way to go, and these are our reasons. So you can't really be successful without both of those. It is luck, but it is a lot of the decisions you make, as you just showed.
Like there were other companies at the time that actually, they positioned themselves very differently. Like they weren't fully AR companies. Some of them were in the VR space, but like fundamentally, if you're doing mapping tech, they have some similar mapping tech, and they've probably been developing it for a couple of years longer than we had. So it's just as important, if not more important, to recognize the opportunities. It's not to say like, I won't say like, oh, we were absolutely brilliant, knew everything and called Apple launching it all. Like, but knowing like, okay, there were 5 other companies that could have pivoted to our direction in the same way that like how we adapted to the Apple announcement. And we just knew our market, talked to the people in the gaming space. And then we luckily had been kind of integrated into that environment. So when it did go hot and then kind of a whole bunch of other gamers came in, everyone pointed at our company. And then we got in a lot of feedback in terms of what their questions were. We were able to answer that, address that. And we did that all in a very kind of quick time frame. So I say that entrepreneurship, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, it's you're given 2 dice and you can cheat and you can weight them and you can file the corners. You can roll your 2 dices and then you bet on triple sixes. And then it's like some drunk person somewhere throws a dice, falls in there, lands in there, and then when it all lands, you can walk away and say like, oh, called it. And now you're a successful entrepreneur. So, which like that. Other people, like if it's more B2B, they kind of built it all up and it's less on there. But for us, there was a luck component, but also like we're paddling in the right direction when the wave hit, but then we caught the wave and surfed it quite well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The last question to wrap here. I think that something you said earlier before we started recording was one of the like key quintessential examples of how good of an entrepreneur you are. You know, I said, hey, we'd love to market the company you're currently working on. And your response is, I'm just focused on talking to customers right now. Like I don't need the marketing, but thank you. That is exactly what you're talking about. Like, don't get distracted, put your horse blinders on, go talk to customers. How many customers have I talked to? So how many customers have you talked to? And is there anything you can share on this new company, or should we just leave that for another time?
I keep a spreadsheet of everything and a whole bunch of notes. I think I'm at over 300 people in my particular market. And that's just over the last 12 months. So then in there and trying to get more and more, but like once you have like your champions in there and you kind of feel confident enough, which is where we were kind of in the early stages. But let's just say there's a lot of interesting problems in the kind of augmented reality search space that post-COVID kind of new opportunities that have come up in the time frame where you can actually have direct measurable ROI, and people in my market don't even think about it as augmented reality. It's just like, hey, can you do this better? Can you do this hands-free? Can you search for things a little bit better in a way? And that's a major multi-billion-dollar problem today. So that's what we're focused on. But yeah, don't want to get into too much of the specifics.
You went against Apple the first time. Sounds like you're going against Google this time. So easy opponents.
I mean, my goal in life is to never be bored, and I've succeeded thus far. The thing is you just need to go into an area that's a niche that like you're not caring about too much. But yeah, I view that people spend 10% of their time looking at screens and 90% of their time looking at the world. So I actually view from an AR perspective, a lot of people are thinking about it in terms of what is the content that's displayed rather than what you can make out from the world. Now, granted, I'm a computer vision mapping guy, so like I could be very biased in terms of, hey, the unlocking the real world is going to be more valuable. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things in the search space.
Do you have the same team from Escher?
No, different team geared a little bit more towards my market, or the new market on there. Founder is now actually at or the co-founder before is now at YCombinator. Other people, yeah. Anyway, we can get into more details on that offline.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you opening up. Thanks for sharing the lessons. I think your story is, there's not that many people in the AR VR industry that have done what you've done. So I really appreciate you coming here and sharing some of the insights and the backstory there.
Thanks for having me.